Hey guys, welcome to another quick tip video. Today I want to go over bringing down the highlights in a creek photograph. Creek photography is pretty unique in some ways, and it can be really tricky to adjust your highlights and your whites. So I want to go over that and help you guys with that. So I'm excited to show you that. So this photo was taken at Big Creek in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. If you guys ever get the chance to be in the area, definitely visit Big Creek. If you love creeks and waterfalls, this is an amazing area. It's just awesome. So here's a photo that I took at Big Creek at one of my favorite spots. And this is my exposure. This is my unedited raw file. And I have exposed this to be as bright as I can without blowing out the highlights in the water. One tricky thing about creek photography is water is highly reflective. So your water is always, or typically, going to be the brightest part of your scene, unless you've got some sky. Sometimes you'll get some spots of sky that'll get blown out too. But other than that, the water is going to be highly reflective and very bright. So you want to expose so that the scene is as bright as you can get it without blowing out the highlights. So that's what I've done here. Water is nice and bright, but the highlights aren't blown out. But it's just a kind of a white mass. It's a white blob. There's not much detail. But if I bring down the highlights, you can start to see the wonderful detail there. So, all right. So let me go over something real quick here. When I first started editing photos in Lightroom, somebody told me to bring down your highlights, right? Because you want to restore the detail in your highlights. And that's generally good advice. But what I would do, obviously this is the global highlight adjustment. So if I bring down the highlights all the way, I'm taking down the highlights throughout the entire scene. And with creek photography, this is a very bad idea, because what I'm doing here, hopefully you can tell, by looking at the video, what it's doing is it's flattening out the scene, and what you lose the natural contrast between the whites and the darks in the scene. It just flattens everything out, and it just doesn't look good. And the reason is you really don't need to bring the highlights down in a lot of these areas. If I look at this beautiful canopy up here with the leaves, the green leaves, I like the way the leaves look. I think it's a nice brightness. So I don't want to bring the highlights down on these leaves. And I don't want to bring the highlights down with these rocks here, this beautiful green moss. I want this green moss to glow. Now I would be okay if the highlights come down a little bit with the white spots on these rocks. But what I want to do, and what I typically do, this is my personal preference. When I first start to edit a creek scene, I will deal with the water. I bring the highlights down with the water and adjust the water to get it looking the way I want it. So I'm going to show you how to do that without bringing the highlights down everywhere else in the scene. And it's actually pretty basic. It's pretty easy. Now there are a few tweaks that I usually do here and there, but the basic idea is pretty easy. So let me show you. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to click on the mask icon here. And then I'm going to come down to radial gradient. I'm going to click on radial gradient. And I've got the feathering at 50%, which I think should be fine. So I'm going to do it something like that. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over here back to the mask, and you see these three dots. I'm going to click on those three dots. It's going to give me a drop down, and I'm going to intersect the mask right here. Intersect the mask with a color range. And I'm going to pick the white of the water. That's all I'm going to do. And you can see the color range is picked right here. You got the white of the water showing up right there. And now if I take down the highlights, it's just affecting the water. And it's also affecting the white on the rocks here too, but I'm fine with that. I'm fine with bringing the highlights down there as well. So I'm going to bring the highlights down, and you can see that the moss is still glowing. It has not taken the highlights down with the moss, so that's great. Although I don't want the highlights taken down up here really. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify the mask. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to subtract a brush to modify the mask. And what I'm going to do is just remove the effect of the mask up here because I think the highlights look fine over there. And I think I'll bring it up here a little bit too. Something like that. So yeah, now it's just bringing it down at the brightest parts with the highlights there. Although it looks like to me it's a little too bright here, a little bit of a hot spot here. So sometimes you have to modify a little bit. So what I'm going to do, real quick, I'm going to take another radial gradient, just a small one. I don't need to intersect this mask with the color range because it's such a small area. I'm not going to affect the highlights elsewhere. So I'm going to go down further, maybe take the exposure down a little bit too. There we go. All right. And let's see, actually one more thing. You can see all the detail now. But what I usually do, I'll bring the whites back up just to restore a little bit of pop to it and increase the contrast overall. So something like that. Maybe 31, plus 31 on the whites. All right, so that's it. Now we can look at it before, after. You can see the difference there, and the rest of the scene is unaffected. So I'm not going to take you through my entire edit of this photo, but I will show you a before and after. Let me show you the final edit. Let's see here. Let's go over here. And all right, here we go. So on the right, here's my before, and here's my final edit. So you can see I've really balanced out the light, and I've done a few things. It looks like I added some blue to the water. A lot of times, just it's just my personal taste. Sometimes I like to add blue to the water, and I added some dehaze, did a few other things. I think I added a Photoshop glow as well, but it was a pretty straightforward edit. And a lot of creek photography is just adjusting those whites and those darks to kind of balance everything out so it looks nice. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you next time.